So I'm working on a book that surrounds the biblical character of Nebuchadnezzar. It's going to be kind of cool, and I haven't got but very far into it. Almost nobody's read it. And I am reminded as to why there's not a whole lot of fiction out there that is supposed to create the story of a biblical narrative, kind of like The Chosen, things like that. And one of the reasons why is because biblical stories in fiction get a ton of criticism. I mean, people really nitpick them to death. And yeah, in one regard, that's deserved, right? You can't just go and make a biblical story however you want and reinterpret it, changing things all you want. And sometimes you get some crazy combinations that need to be called out. Like one of the most recent videos that I saw was Noah. Aronofsky had his vision, and he had his own thoughts and moral ideas that he wanted to transplant into the story. So now, all of a sudden, Noah is a radical environmental activist that wants to annihilate humanity and is stalking around the ship like a serial killer trying to kill babies. Like, what the heck, Aronofsky? What are you doing? You kind of pitched your tent a little far there, okay? Maybe you should have gotten some good feedback from the theological community first before you went and did that. But regardless, it is really, really hard to make good fiction based on a biblical narrative because of that criticism. And in my story I'm trying to write, you've got in Daniel where you have this scene where Nebuchadnezzar has this horrible dream, right? And well, that happens several times, but he has this terrible dream where he goes mad and he calls Daniel in. And I can just imagine if people, maybe they got their ideas from Sunday school, from like a picture board that the teacher threw up there. And that's all of a sudden, that's the image they've had their whole life of this scene, right? And they don't think about what goes into that scene. And if what you concoct doesn't exactly line up with what they have in their head, they get outrageously offended. And they're like, they're changing the Bible. That's not scriptural. That's inaccurate. Well, just think about this for a sec, because your picture board from Sunday school is probably not going to make sense. A lot of people in their minds, when they think about this scene between Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar, and he goes in to interpret his dream, they have this silly idea in their heads that like the king wakes up in a panic. He's like, oh, I've had this horrible dream. Quick, fetch Daniel for me. And then Daniel's like in the next room, and Daniel just walks over, and Daniel's like, what's going on, my king? All this is happening in bed. And he's sitting there like, you're going to be okay, but oh, here's what the dream means. It's just like, are you kidding me? And this is not a private conversation. Think about what goes into this. Number one, all the magicians and the wise men that the king's already called, which by the way work underneath Daniel, okay, he's our supervisor at this point. They've already come and they've had their say. And when the king wakes up in the palace, it's not a private thing, right? If he's already gone out and fetched all these wise men to bring him in and tell him what's going on, this is not a private affair. This is probably going on in the king's court, not even a side room. There's a lot of people involved. There's going to be people everywhere. The king just woke up in the middle of the night. You need to wake up with him. If you are anywhere near the king or have anything to do with him, you're going to be there immediately. Why? Because you need to be there just in case the king goes, I need what's his bucket? Go and get me this. If you're not there, that's a bad thing. You could get fired, okay? Like, you have to be there. So I'm absolutely certain this probably happens in the court. And there's a ton of people there. This is not a private affair. Everybody knows about this. And the word's going to get out really quickly about this vision. So you have to reimagine this whole scenario. It's not going to be your picture book. It's not going to be like from childhood. It's going to be very different. So just think about that. And like I said, I think criticism is warranted because we need controls on the biblical narrative. Otherwise, people just come up with crazy stuff. But at the same time, think beforehand and put logic to it and say, just think to yourself, do I know what I'm talking about? Have I thought this through? Is what they're saying, does that make sense? Like another great example is in The Chosen. There were some people that are offended that the guys are meeting in a bar. Okay? Like a tavern. It's like, where else do you think they're going to meet? All right? It's like they're meeting somewhere to be friends and family and have discussions. They're not meeting in Peter's house. I guarantee you, his house is tiny. People didn't live in their houses like you do. You probably spend a great amount of time in your house. Your house is a mansion. Like compared to all human history, you live in a mansion. Even if you live in like a modern, like an 800 square foot house, that's like a mansion compared to these people, right? You have a huge house. You have air conditioning. If they were alive today, they'd want to sit in your house and hang out, okay? They don't have that. They're not going to sit in Peter's house in the heat of the day, right after they get off work maybe, or in the middle of the day when they're trying to take a break, like a siesta type thing. Like, not a siesta, but you know what I mean. Like, it's dumb to work in the heat of the day, especially in ancient history, right? You don't do that. So where do you go? You go to a place like that. That actually has rooms. They're not going to go to the local church. They don't have a church with rooms and a conference room you can sit down and drink lemonade and play rook. They don't have that, right? Where are they going to go? They're going to go there. So just think it through on what kind of, and also think about the type of men you're dealing with too. Like these guys are fishermen, right? It's like going to the bar after a day of work. I mean, like just lose the storybook idea sometimes and just think about reality, because that's what's going on. So anyway, I'm working on that, and I'm just reminded of that. And I think there's something valuable to be said in there. Just really dive in and get to know your subject matter before you peek up with criticism, even if it's valuable. We need good feedback to help advance a conversation, not tons of fluff feedback. And that's a lesson applicable to anything, not just Bible story. And another part of this is that there's some interpretability in things that aren't really defined in the scripture. It can go either way, such as with the disciples meeting at the tavern. I mean, yeah, maybe they met at the tavern, but maybe they actually met underneath a tree in the shade and they eat like packed lunches. I mean, they could have done that too. There's a lot of stuff that the scripture doesn't tell you because it's focused on the point of the story. And it does provide sometimes some rather obscure minute details that don't seem to really add to the story much, but that just goes to show it's based off of eyewitness accounts, and those eyewitness accounts can be all over the place. So, that's fine, but it's not going to get every detail in there. This isn't a massive book. These are letters written by people that needed to be economical and get the point across. So they're not going to take 4 or 5 novels in order to tell this story and include all these every little detail about what they did. So there's interpretability in there, and you should probably be okay with that. The big thing is, what's the point of the story? What is it saying? Is it actually sticking to the point of the scriptural narrative, or does it betray it somehow, right? And as long as it's not doing that, as long as it's correct with its target, I think there's interpretability there. And yeah, you should be okay with that.